INEOS have seemingly just lost the battle to use one of the most interesting pieces of tech on their LEQ12 test platform. But this is America's Cup, it's a war, not a battle, and they fired back with a response. They think that this same interpretation that bans their novel tech could also mean that all the other teams are breaking elements of the technical regulations themselves. Interesting stuff, let's jump into it. Okay, so what is this novel piece of equipment that INEOS are using? It's the tow mast. Was barely covered in any of the media, but something we picked up in our reaction video to the INEOS launch of their Cybertruck or Silver Arrow, Rita, whatever you want to call it. And we fawned over this potential towing instrument post. And it is really significant, and you may be wondering why. Well, tank testing using models in a controlled environment is banned in the AC. It's a cost-cutting measure, and it's been banned for a few cup cycles already. And this means the teams have to rely on computer simulation, predictions, models, and the only way to then validate those models is to sail a boat and collect data on a sailing platform. Now, as we all know, sailing is full of environmental factors, gusty winds, choppy seas, and tides. All this makes the data you collect to validate your models quite noisy and poses a bit of a problem for the teams. So what INEOS looked to do with this tow mast was circumvent the whole sailing part of going sailing. It would give them a way of collecting data without putting the sails and the rig up, and enables them to simulate, not perfectly, but in some way simulate the forces of a boat when it's sailing. What a tow mast does is it raises up the attachment point, the tow line, and starts to replicate some of the forces you experience on a sailing boat. The rolling moments, where the centre of effort is in the sails, and this is critical to get your boat to behave like a sailing boat when it's under a tow. And the potential here cannot be underestimated. Alinghi and Luna Rossa have lost, or to be honest, all the teams have lost time due to poor conditions. So at the very least, it gets you out on those light wind days collecting some useful data. But at the extreme, you could even view this as completely sidestepping the no tank testing rule. Effectively, you create conditions where the whole ocean becomes your test tank. It's potentially a very powerful bit of equipment. Let's go through the timeline of, because likely you won't have seen this tow mast yet. It's only really been mentioned in our initial reaction video. On the 27th of October, INEOS unveiled their Cybertruck Silver Arrow Rita test platform. It's an LEQ12, less or equal to 12 meters, and it's a place where you can test equipment, but only a certain number of equipment items. That's limited in section 4 of the technical regulations. So you can't go wild putting loads of different foils on these test platform, loads of different masts, loads of different sails. You've got a limit on how much equipment you can actually test with them. We put out our reaction video on the 4th of November, actually recorded a few days before, but we put it out on the 4th of November, and we really like the idea of this tow mast and the potential it had. Now will go seemingly unseen, but the potential this tow mast had. Then it all kicked off. On the 15th of November, a royal inquiry was submitted to the AC 37 notice board questioning the legality of an instrument post. So this is the rule inquiry section of the notice board, and you can see 15th of 11th, the first inquiry goes in. And as a side note, I just love how this system works. It's all anonymous. Any team can put an inquiry in, and all the teams then get to respond to each inquiry, give their interpretation before the rule committees kind of makes an initial ruling. The teams get to comment again, and then they make a final ruling. So this is the initial inquiry here, and they're basically saying section 4.1 of the technical regulations limits the amount of key components you can put on your test platform, and they're basically then asking, this towing mast, it's attached to the mast ball and it's supported by other rigging, does this not make it a mast? So presumably if someone used a towing mast, that would then stop them from launching with another mast for sailing. INEOS then went sailing on the 18th of the 11th, just a few days later, no mast to be seen. Then on the 21st of November, we get the first responses back from the different teams, and this first one's quite in depth actually. They go into the technical regulations, the definitions, and they say that because it's attached to the mast ball, because it's supported by rigging, and it at least partly serves the purposes of a mast tube, and therefore it is the principal spar and should count as a mast tube. And they say the fact that this mast cannot raise sails is irrelevant. That's only one function of a mast. And they also say that it's transmitting dry forces to the boat, and that's again some of the function of an AC75 mast tube, and therefore that this tow mast should count as a mast tube on an LAQ 12. Other teams respond. This second team says no to speculation here. This is all anonymous, but this could be INEOS potentially even responding to their own inquiry. That's how this system works. I love the intrigue behind it. It's fascinating. Another team responds saying there's not enough information, and then finally we have another team who also responds saying yes, this towing mast counts as a mast on the LAQ 12. On the 23rd of the 11th, the rules committee responds with their first interpretation, and they basically agree with the first competitor response, saying that yes, it is a mast tube because it's on the mast ball, it's attached by the same stays, and it transmits forces to the boat, and the fact that it can launch hoist sails or not is just one function of a mast, and is irrelevant in this context, which basically says if INEOS use this tow mast, it counts as their one mast. But we get one extra round of competitive responses. INEOS after this do another day on the water, still no tow mast, probably waiting to see how this rules inquiry unfolds. And then just yesterday we get the second round of competitive responses. Most of them agree, however we get this super sassy reply, and I've got no way of telling who this reply comes from, but I am presuming it is from INEOS, just because the way it's worded seems to be quite defensive. It's quite sassy in the way it says, we agree that the towing post needs only resemble one aspect of either the form or function of a mast tube to be notifiable under TR 4.1. So they're basically conceding the point straight off the bat. Okay, you got us. This is a mast. They've not used this mast yet, so it doesn't really hurt them in terms of there won't be any penalties. They've not broken any rules with this mast yet. It does mean they can't use something that did look potentially quite valuable. But then they go on to really throw the cat among the pigeons and ask some difficult questions to the rules committee and their interpretation. And they basically are making the point that if the rules committee are saying that simply transferring a force, a driving force to the boat makes a piece of equipment a mast, then surely of all the other points that the teams are attaching their tow ropes to should also be masts. And the very extreme of this, if a man on the boat is holding a tow rope, is he himself a mast? Difficult questions being asked in these clarifications. Finally, they also point to the new bit of sensor tech that Luna Rossa have put on their boat, to record data from the foil. Could be cameras in here, could be sensor looking at the position of the flap and deformation in the flap of the foil. But anyway, Luna Rossa have mounted this on their foil. Now this is experiencing hydrodynamic forces in a way that's similar to the wing. Should this device that's mounted on it be counted as part of the wing and therefore notifiable once this was mounted as a new wing, or at least a new revision of the wing? And clearly, if other teams have already been doing this by like Luna Rossa have Luna Rossa broken a rule? Will they be subsequently penalised as a result of this? I'm presuming this is INEOS that have said this. What do you think? Do you think they've got a point here, or do you think they're really stretching this interpretation and just scratching around for kind of some sort of recompense? Personally, I think it's kind of a shame. I was really excited about seeing the toe mast. I thought it was novel. I thought it was a cheap way to get around the tank testing issue. And yeah, I just would have loved to see them tow with it and see how it worked, or if it even worked. So would have been interesting to see. I kind of felt that rule about the equipment on the boat is to limit, how many masts they can produce to test bend characteristics, etc., etc., how many foils they can test. And this tow mast they put on isn't to be tested itself. It is an instrument to test the rest of the platform. So in that way, it's not really got the same function as a sailing mast. That was my feeling on it. But my feeling doesn't count for anything. These are the rules, and the rules say they're only allowed one mast. INEOS seem to concede that this is a mast in some way, and therefore they probably won't use it. Interestingly, they could use it as their only mast, and then that makes their platform essentially a towing only platform, not a sailing platform. Be interesting to go down that route. I still think the value of going sailing in a boat is more valuable than the towing, so I think that's unlikely, but we don't know the answer to that question yet. Like your thoughts on that. But I think the real interesting thing is to see how the Rules Committee deal with this competitor response. Are they going to penalise other teams? Are they going to clarify the towing arrangements? Or are they going to kind of dismiss this out of hand as just being a bit of nonsense and a bit of a stretch by INEOS? I think this is going to run a little bit. Really looking forward to seeing what the final response is. You've got the recon report coming next week for November. Really interesting month in the Cup. And in other news, we're getting very close to 20,000 subscribers, so that's cool. You can subscribe if you want. You don't have to, but you can. And also 15% off Alan in the description below. Yeah, looking forward to the recon report now. Catch you around.